Welcome to 3.6. This is the final part of Theme 3. Theme 3 has 6 units, Theme 4 only has 4, so each year, Year 12 and Year 13 both have 10 in total. This one's a really, really short one. The thing is with 3.6 is there are only a few specific key terms that you can have introduced from 3.6. It's more of a concept. That concept of change kind of brings together the entirety of Theme 3. So there are so many different ways a business can change that we've already looked at in other videos in Theme 3. This kind of recaps them all and brings them together and just focuses on the concept of change and what change actually means. So 361 is the causes and effects of change. In terms of causes, there's a bunch we could have a look at. The first is the change of an organization's size. So as businesses get bigger, they're going to obviously change. That could be in terms of leadership, that could be in terms of structure, that could be in terms of size of the organization and numbers of staff. In a really small business, the owner, the entrepreneur might do quite a lot of the work themselves, whereas when a business becomes really large, they might have to rely on different members of staff, they might hire directors, they might have to kind of delegate a lot of responsibilities. And so as a business grows, they're going to change quite drastically. As a business expands from one shop to two shops to three shops, as a business expands from one country to another, there are so many different factors here that could cause changes within the way the organization is run, both in a good way and a bad way. The second is poor performance. If a business doesn't do very well, obviously they're going to make changes, and these changes might be things that they're not ideal, not necessarily things they wanted to change, but if your business isn't performing and you don't change, your business is probably going to fail. So poor performance is one of the more common kind of prompts for change. New ownership. So after a takeover or a merger, you might see new ownership come in and make changes to the business if the business needs to make changes. Sometimes new owners don't necessarily want to change something that's already working, but more often than not, they'll want to put their own stamp on things. Transformational leadership. This could be not necessarily new owners, but just a new leader being brought into an organization, usually with the intent of changing, or perhaps in certain cases trying to keep things the same as they are after a kind of an organizational leader who was very well liked and very well respected might leave. We'll talk a bit more about that in 363. Transformational leadership is leadership that changes an organization, that transforms an organization. Goes without saying, that one. And then lastly, we've got pestle factors. I'm not going to go through these in a huge amount of detail. They're dealt with in the 3.1 video, but political, economic, social, technological, legal, and ethical, environmental factors could cause a business to change. The economy could cause a business to change. Technology could cause a business to change. We've seen many businesses die because technology's just replaced them, or new opportunities have come about. So pestle factors could also cause a business to change. What are the effects of this change? Well, one could be it will affect our ability to be competitive, potentially in a good way, potentially in a bad way, depending on the decisions that these businesses have made. It might change our productivity. We've definitely seen that with technology, for example, technology changing the way businesses are productive, potentially allowing for business to be more productive. Financial performance, if we can get these things right, then this change hopefully will be a positive thing. Of course, sometimes like economic factors could cause a negative effect on financial performance. We've seen that in the supermarket industry, where the economy has meant that more people have gone towards kind of lower priced options, and a lot of other businesses have struggled with that financially. And then the last is it will have an impact on loads of different stakeholders. So that kind of brings us to these key factors in change. So we've got organizational culture, that will be a factor in change. If we're trying to change an organization, we need to be aware of certainly how easy that change will be. And if we've got an organizational culture that is really well established, it can make changing that organization quite difficult. We talk about organizational culture in the 3.4 video. So if you're not sure what culture really means, focus on that video for that bit. So organizational culture could be a factor. If there's quite a strong culture and, for example, a new leader comes in, that could be quite a level of resistance. The size of the organization could be a factor as well. Look, quite simply, it's much easier to change something within a small organization where you can communicate changes effectively than it would be for example, a new CEO of Tesco where there are hundreds of thousands of employees over thousands of stores. They're going to find it really, really difficult to get change to happen consistently, and likely going to take a little bit longer there. That links to this next point, which is how quickly the change happens. There's different types of change. and sometimes this is intentional, sometimes it's out of your control. If a change happens really, really quickly and a business doesn't have an opportunity to adapt to that change, that can be quite catastrophic. On the other hand, a business having a lot of time to prepare for a change maybe can formulate more of a plan to help deal with it. But this also affects the decisions that a business makes and how quickly they make these decisions. Sometimes businesses will try and change too quickly. And especially if you're trying to kind of reposition yourself within a market, there's an understanding that has to take time. And the whole concept of Rome wasn't built in a day. Sometimes businesses can kind of rush in and try and do a little bit too much too fast, which can have a negative impact. And then finally, we touched on this when we mentioned organizational culture, but resistance to change. Resistance can come from a few different stakeholders. Employees may be resistant to change, especially if they, for example, have been in an organization for a long period of time. But also customers are resistant to change. If, for example, one really good example of this is Netflix. Netflix have started to crack down on the password sharing. And while I'm sure logically customers understand that, it makes sense that the business would do that, because if they get more revenue, then of course they can then use that money to, first of all, make more profit, but also reinvest into the programs. But customers are of course going to resist that if they've been able to get away with not paying for Netflix, and now they're going to have to. So you get resistance from staff, you get resistance from customers, you can get resistance from pressure groups and other kind of external stakeholders involved in the organization. The last topic in 3.6 is scenario planning. There's a few different ways to scenario plan. The whole concept of scenario planning is where we are looking at potential, I don't want to say planning for certain scenarios, but that pretty much is what it is. It's when we're looking at potential things that could happen within an organization and trying to prepare for them as best we can. That's basically just saying planning for scenarios, just in different words. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. There's a few different ways we can do this. The first is a risk assessment. A risk assessment is done so many times within an organization, and you're looking at potential risks that could come about because of a particular action, and you are looking at the potential cost. And that cost doesn't necessarily have to just mean money, but often it does. For example, a school trip will have a risk assessment. You can't go on a school trip without doing a risk assessment. And that will be looking at what the potential dangers and risks are and what potential plans might be in place to address these risks if they occur. We also have risk mitigation, and this is about trying to anticipate potential risks and potential changes and react to them effectively early. So any kind of risk mitigation activity would be to try and reduce the potential impact, especially if you know that something could potentially happen. Risk mitigation might mean that, yeah, okay, it might happen, but it won't happen quite as severely as we potentially feared. This could be business continuity. So businesses' plans to get back to normal after a situation. So, for example, there may be a continuity plan for if there is bad weather in a business. It might be a continuity plan for if we had one in school. For example, we obviously are a couple of years removed from the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns. We had to very quickly kind of adapt schooling to teach remotely, and some of the stuff we did in part of that has kind of given me the skills to do this. But we now have a continuity plan so that if something like that happened again, we'd be able to really quickly go into that situation. We'd be able to very quickly adapt. And so, but also after that happened, we'd be able to get back to normal pretty quickly as well. And then lastly, another kind of area of risk mitigation could be succession planning. And this is really, really important for organizations. It's not often that a business will get this perfectly right, but succession planning is where we're planning for the eventual replacement of a key employee. This, again, it's not super common that you would know that a key employee is going to leave, but it could be, for example, if you've had like a long-running CEO who's been with the company for a long period of time and they're planning to retire in 4 or 5 years, they might start planning for that by putting a succession plan in place. Okay, who's going to take over from me? What do they need to know before that day occurs? Sometimes it happens, sometimes, change like that happens where an employee leaves or passes away or something like that, and you might not have the chance to prepare that transition. But if you can, then it's obviously a good idea to do so, because it means that transition can be quite smooth. So again, compared to some of the other presentations in Theme 3, this is a really, really quiet slide, but a really, really important one nonetheless, because in particular, the key terms in 3.6.3 are really important. The other parts, I guess they're just kind of fundamental links to other topics that we've covered throughout Theme 3, and to be honest, Themes 1, 2, and 4 as well. So have a look at the resources in the description, and obviously let me know in the comments if you've got any questions, and I will see you on the next video.